Hey, welcome to the Undercover Adventure podcast. I'm Chad Christopher, and today we're going to talk to Daniel Brasuell. Daniel moved from California to Tennessee a few years back, and him and I became friends and paddled together a good bit. And Daniel has written through a digital publication called wetstate.com. He's compiled one of the most comprehensive lists of whitewater runs in the world. He's paddled on almost every major continent in the world and has a pretty deep knowledge of the High Sierras, a lot of the Northern California, High Sierra California runs, and then also what he's explored in the Southeast since he's been here. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
You're in there, it's like giving you a headache and giving you vertigo with it so quiet. Yeah, it was a trip to do work in there. I didn't like it.
No. All right, so we'll see if this works the third time. So Anyway, quick introduction: Daniel Brasuell, aerospace engineer, adventurer. How long have you been kayaking?
I started when I was a kid. First time in a canoe was like 7 years old. First time rafting, 9 years old. Got in a kayak around 12 or 13 years old through Boy Scouts.
Okay. Yeah. And then just kind of from there,
Yeah, so the Boy Scout troop I was in did a yearly trip. So there was a family trip. That's why I was able to start at 7 in a canoe. We had like 15 Coleman canoes, which were great because we'd wrap them around rocks because you have little kids driving these canoes. And then you just take the aluminum gunnels off and put new ones on. They pop back into shape. So it was great for us, going through them like candy. But we do a 50-mile trip up on the Trinity River and the Klamath River. And it was like class 2, 2+, maybe 1 or 2 class 3 minuses. And we'd take a week and sleep on the river and just head down the river. And it really made me catch the bug. We had a couple kayaks too. So a Corsica, a Dancer, and my brother owned a Mirage back then. So the older boys got to be in the kayak. So when I was like 12 or 13, started being in one of those kayaks for the trip. And then during college, started river guiding and saved up money to buy a Big Easy. And then just kind of became a habit from there. Yeah.
So on the professional side of things, you are formally trained as an aerospace engineer. Your background is kind of solid state and liquid state.
Rockets.
And
yeah. So for school, I did a dual major for aerospace and mechanical engineering. And then I also minored in managerial economics, which kind of played a part into the later end of my career. And I also minored in religious studies just for informational learning about the world a bit. And then I went to grad school, double mastered as well in mechanical and aeronautical engineering. And then went into aerospace, into the rockets for a company called Aerojet in Sacramento. And I started on the solid side of rockets. So that's kind of like your heavy launch stuff or your ballistic missiles. A lot of those tend to be solid propellant rockets. And then I went from there after a year and a half, 2 years of doing the solid stuff, moved on to the liquid side, which is more like your commercial space stuff. So like the Falcon 9 that Elon Musk launches is a liquid rocket. A lot of the Delta Heavy, the Atlas V, those are liquid rockets, as well as a lot of the satellites that use liquid propulsion as well.
Gotcha. So broad overview, give me like a 10,000 foot perspective on like what drew you to that major, and then what were you kind of hoping to do with it, and then what did it actually materialize into over like the course of your career?
Yeah, so I was always good at math and physics-based stuff, so engineering seemed like a fit. My dad was an engineer, so like he would always bring home the plastic models, to build, World War II airplanes or, classic cars or whatnot. And so I really enjoyed doing that. I was often in trouble, so I was often spending weeks at a time in my bedroom grounded. So I'd make those models while I was grounded. So I always kind of enjoyed that aspect of putting stuff together, building things. And, I wanted to stay technical, so I thought that I wasn't going to pursue a management path and just kind of stay technical and be able to not have to be needed, just from wanting to have spare time and not feel like I owed the company anything more than my 8 hours a day or whatnot. Mm-hmm. But it turns out in engineering, there's a joke where how do you tell if an engineer is an extrovert? They'll look at your feet while they're talking to you. So extroverted engineers, or at least social engineers, tend to end up being pulled into management, which is what happened to me. I ended up going into program management, which then fed into the consulting half of my career. And it was kind of one of those things that it was starting to pull me away from the things that were important to me, the life that I wanted to be living. So quickly made a plan to figure out how to retire as soon as possible, which is what we did.
Nice. And so when you kind of got into, like, what was some of the cooler projects you worked on? Like I looked at, I didn't know you worked for Bigelow.
Yeah, Bigelow
like
Aerospace. I don't think they exist anymore.
No.
But yeah, Bigelow Aerospace was kind of while SpaceX was first building up, Blue Origin was still just getting started. Bigelow Aerospace was another name in the commercial, privately owned space companies. And what they were trying to do, Bigelow made a massive fortune with Budget Inn and Suites, I think is what the name of it was. It was a budget line of hotels. So he had billions of dollars, and he wanted to build space hotels / space stations for countries that couldn't afford time on the International Space Station to do whatever experiments or lab stuff they might want to do. And ended up never taking off. They put a couple propulsion prototypes up, but the propulsion system we made for them was for their first commercial system, which they never found a buyer for it or any of the subsequent ones. So I think during the pandemic, they closed their doors for good. Yeah.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that was cool. It was interesting to see. Yeah, I don't know. Working on a small team, there was just like 5 of us. It was kind of like a skunk works type of thing, because it was trying to be as cheap as possible, trying to cut out a lot of the red tape and the bureaucracy that the military and the NASA programs kind of carry with them, because there's just so much oversight when you're working for the government. So it was a skunk work type thing. So there was like 5 of us, and we designed it from the ground up, put it all together, tested it, shipped it off. So that was a really cool experience, that one.
So how did you get into that kind of stuff? Like, is it like word of mouth? Like,
so I kind of lucked into it through a series of unfortunate events. So when I started my career, I was what was called a ballistician, which is the one that designs the inside of the solid rocket. So like solid rockets, if you can kind of think of like static or kinetic stand, that your kids play with, you cast your rockets and you put it into a big bin, and it's kind of like that type of consistency, and then it hardens into be a hard, like rock, like rubber, or rubber like rock, however you want to say it. So whatever geometries, like you put tools in there to like keep a cylinder in the middle and to have fins on it, or you might have some rings inside that change the geometry as it burns, because it burns symmetrically. So after a second, it will have burned an inch of whatever surface area is being shown. So you change the negative cavity within that rocket, and that changes how it burns, whether you want it to be a huge impulse when it's first launching out of the tube or off the stand, or whether you want it to have a bigger impulse when it's finishing its mission, whatever it might be. So we would design the interior and work with the propellant chemists and all that sort of stuff to design the rockets. But I was working on that, and that was right around the beginning of the Bush administration, maybe not the beginning of the second half of his second term. And programs were getting cut that were carryovers from the Clinton era. So there wasn't a whole lot of work in ballistics. So just by chance, I got loaned to a different group, which then put me on that Sundancer project for Bigelow, and was kind of my gateway into project engineering and into the liquid side. And that kind of changed my entire career, because learning project engineering, that's when you learn how to schedule and do kind of the business management side of it. You're still engineer, so you're still on the technical stuff. But you're kind of on the business side of the technical stuff. So you're doing a lot of negotiating of statement of works or specifications, and working with suppliers and vendors, and doing stuff with your hands and schedules, and coordinating your manufacturing team, your quality team, et cetera, which was then leverage into the rest of my career.
Which one did you like better, the logistics side of stuff and managerial, or did you like the developmental?
So, after the couple years that I was a ballistician, I don't think anyone in the company knew I existed outside of the 5 ballisticians, and my boss, and maybe 1 or 2 chief engineers for programs that I had supported. So that, as someone that, I'm not necessarily an extrovert, but I do like to be social.
Which is rare.
In engineering, yeah. So from a technical standpoint, that was isolating. You just kind of get lonely sitting there in your cubicle just plugging away. So I did like the project engineering side of it, to where I got to go to meetings, I got to go on business trips, I got to have influence over more than just my task. But also, I went to 6 years of college, and I basically used that engineering for like a year and a half, 2 years before moving into the project engineering and then program management, where I didn't use it anymore. So that's kind of like, my parents don't like to think about, how much time they supported me.
So I kind of want to jump back and forth between so obviously you're an extreme sports athlete.
Mm-hmm. And used to be anyways.
Well, we're all recovering extreme sports athletes to some extent, but you run a website called a Wet State, which is like a online dictionary for a lot of the whitewater in, Europe, United States, Canada, all over. And so, brief overview on what do you think drew you to whitewater and pursuing that? Because that seems like a very different hobby path from your typical engineer.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I've always enjoyed, when I was a kid, I did a lot of backpacking too, a lot of hiking, went to a lot of national parks. My family liked to camp. So, we were always doing road trips all over the country. We drove to Niagara Falls from California when I was 1 year old, so my parents were pretty motivated with kids. So kayaking was just kind of another great way to see places, one, it was fun. I already knew how to do it through the scouts. So I got through kind of the early scared learning phases, as a littler kid. So by the time that my life was kind of more up to me, when I was in college and, was prioritizing where I spent my work money, it just seemed like something really fun to do. Back then we had a play wave near us. So I was able to go and practice, and I made goals with everything in my life. I'm a goal maker. And I have spreadsheets for just about every aspect of my life, for where I am and where I've been and where I want to go and all that sort of stuff. And kayaking just kind of fit into that, where, I'd seen the videos. My brother also boated, and he had Twitch 4 and he had Nerpoo. And just seeing where kayaking could go, I'd seen the class 3 stuff. I'd done a little bit of rafting on class 4 or 5, but to see what kayaking could be was eye opening, and I remember back, I had a rotating screensaver, and I, dug through the internet for all the kayaking photos I could find. And back then there weren't websites, and, there wasn't a whole lot of ways to find this stuff, but I'd found maybe 20 or 30 nice enough photos. One was Upper Cherry, one was of Golden Gate on the South Fork of the American, and there's a bunch of others, but I remember those two very distinctly, having those on my rotating screen. And then as the years go by and you start doing these runs, and making them a reality, that only inspired me that much more to want to get after it, as you start seeing that, if you practice and train, and, I'm fat these days, but, back when I was younger, I was, relatively fit. That the only limitation was going to be how much spare time that I had. And that's the hardest thing about being a working professional, is most of your viewers probably know, is finding the time, is balancing all the career stuff with trying to progress in boating safely. You don't want to take too big of a step forward. It all needs to be at a measured pace. But yeah.
So with a Wet State, give me a brief overview of the Wet State, and then what was your goal for starting it, and then kind of what did it morph into?
Yeah. So a Wet State Started as just kind of a mile by mile run description of the runs I'd done. At the time, there was a website, there's still a website, I should say, Bill Tuttle's website, which is cacreeks.com, so californiacreeks.com. At the time, it was like creekin.net or something like that, but he changed the name of it some years back. But it was kind of a similar sort of thing, mile by mile descriptions. They were IKers, and they had a lot of easier runs, but they kind of stopped. They had a couple of the 4.5s, but not a whole lot. They kind of stopped in the class 4 range. So the idea just kind of started as to kind of fill that need, of information. At the time, there was one guidebook for California, the Stanley Holbeck book, which was released in like 97, still hasn't been updated. There wasn't anything more recent than that. So information for any of the modern runs was completely non-existent. And as I was telling you before we turned on the cameras and stuff, the initial idea was I had time when I was doing my research for grad school where I just had hours to kill while I was running my simulations. And I wanted to learn HTML because I thought it'd be a valuable thing to learn. And I needed a project to apply it to because, like studying a language, it's a lot harder if you're just reading a dictionary versus if you're actually trying to immerse yourself into something. Yeah. So I had a couple write-ups for some runs that I'd done for my own notes, so for my own memory's sake, just so I could go back a couple years later and remember the lines. It's like, well, I'll just put those notes into a website form, kind of like Cal Creeks. And that's how it was kind of initially born, and I put it online, and we got positive feedback, and that encouraged me to buy a year subscription for the web domain and GoDaddy web services. And then that was, I don't know, 22 years ago, something like that, I think.
Jeez. So how many, what do you think, how many runs are on there now?
So actually, I thought you might ask. So I actually counted it last night, and it's 647 different runs, and I'm missing probably like 10 that I've done because from early days, I didn't write some of the class 2 stuff or like the Grand Canyon. I've done that twice, but it was before any of this, and there's too many miles. I would have just been plagiarizing someone else's write-up, trying to regurgitate memory from that stuff. So yeah, 647, 16 countries and 24 states, I think.
So I kind of want to bounce back and forth a little bit because I kind of want to see where you were in your professional career, as you were pursuing, your Whitewater endeavors. So I know one time you were I came and I did North Chick because I was in Huntsville for a business trip.
Yeah.
So I think some of the outdoor community kind of gets a bad rap of just a bunch of just lazy hippie dirtbags, which there are plenty of those. We probably have both been one of them. I've been one of those before. But I think it's cool. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can do it all if you're motivated enough. And so talk about how you incorporated Whitewater into some of your professional pursuits. Yeah, so I mean, I've been on the mix a little business with pleasure several times throughout my career. The trips you were talking about, so back when I lived in Sacramento, I would come out to Huntsville, Alabama a lot because working in Aerospace, Huntsville, with the Marshall Space Flight Center and the Redstone Arsenal, there's a lot of business there. A lot of companies have headquarters in Huntsville. So I'd have to come out a couple times a year. And I had a lot of friends here. My house in Sacramento was kind of like a hostel. So people from all over the world would come and crash on my floor, and I'd be going to work still. So I'd be stepping over people on my way out the door to work, and they're having kayaking trips of lifetimes, that was sometimes there was fear of missing out on that one. But it made it so I had a lot of friends. So I was able to come out on business trips to Huntsville. Dave Levitt let me borrow his boat a bunch of times. Sometimes I rented boats. I already knew Jim Janney from his time in California, so he connected me with a bunch of his friends. I knew Daniel Rucker and Phil, I want to say Branch is his last name. I haven't talked to him in a couple of years. I think it's Branch. Anyways, they're some Chattanooga boys. I knew them from traveling before, so I was able to come and crash on people's couches and have people to boat with. And it was after one of those trips that I came back, and it was a North Chick, Rock Creek down in Georgia, LRC. I think we did one other run on that
weekend, but I don't remember what it was.
You got all that in the same weekend?
Yeah. I mean, the Rock Creek was like dirt low. It was it was the California in me was being like, there's not enough water to boat. But it went fine. It went fine. It was still a lot of fun. You're still falling quickly down the hillside.
Yeah.
Yeah, I came back and my wife, Diane, or girlfriend at the time, was applying to residencies. And I was like, the Southeast wouldn't be a bad place to live. There'd be a lot of fun stuff for a few years. So we talked about it, and she ended up applying to some residencies out here. But it was funny because when she interviewed at the Knoxville residency, none of them thought that she would prioritize the Southeast. They're like, wow, she's just trying to get some safeties, in case she doesn't get her primary choices. There's no reason why the California person would want to move to Knoxville. But thankfully, one of our friends, or one of the older people in the program, who's now our friend, Emily, her husband was a boater and was like, Knoxville's actually a pretty good boating location, and she's big into boating. So she actually might want to be here. So they ranked her higher in the residency programs, and she ended up matching there, and kind of the rest is history. That was 11 years ago now.
So did you meet Diane through paddling?
Yeah, I did. So it was actually a big day in my life. I met Jim Janey the same day.
Really?
Yeah, Jim and Diane. So Jim Janey's one of my best friends now. So anyways, the day started. We were out on the North Fork of the Feather. I was boating with my brother, who just got back from grad school out in Chicago. And the put-in for the Cresta run on the North Fork of the Feather, you have to hike up to do one extra kind of Class 5 rapid. And me and my brother and our friends were hiking up to do that. And then that's when I met Jim. He paddled across the eddy. He was doing an internship out in California. And the person he was boating with didn't want to hike up and didn't want to do the hard run the next day, the Tobin section. So he paddled over to me, of all the people that were just floating around the eddy before paddling down the rapid, and was like, hey, you guys planning to do Tobin tomorrow? It's like, yeah. He's like, do you mind if I get your number so we can try to touch base? I don't have anyone to boat with. It's like, okay, cool. And then after 2 rapids, there was a play spot. My brother was one of the only people in a play boat. So I was sitting there waiting for him, and him and this girl were throwing tricks in the hole. And that girl ended up meeting Diane, talked to her briefly. Yeah, she doesn't remember this. She doesn't remember meeting me. It took her the 3rd time. So that night we were at a bar, and it's the one bar in this town of Tobin, California, which doesn't exist anymore. And me and my brother were waiting for the dinner service to start. We had an hour and a half, so we were catching up after he'd been gone for a year or two, and drinking heavily. And then Diane walked in with a UC Davis shirt, which was the college I went to. But she was with her mom, so I didn't dare. I was way too drunk to be trying to hit on her in front of her mom. But the next day, I saw her again on the water and talked to her briefly. And then I took a photo of her on an old disposable point and shoot, because that's what digital cameras didn't exist back then. And at the takeout, I asked her for her email address, her school.
I got this photo.
Yeah, I got a photo of you.
I see you. And
then, 6 months later, she finally was willing to go on a date with me.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's how we met. So our entire relationship started off around boating. All of our early dates was boating, kind of all that, which also was a big help in this life of the professional world / adventuring, because where most people have to balance their significant others, and if they don't boat, which I feel like it's more rare, that kayakers have a partner that's also boating.
That is rare, to be able to share the joint responsibilities of the family and the profession. So give me a brief overview of Diane's professional career.
So Diane,
she's an accomplished medical professional, which people don't realize.
So she is a better kayaker.
Well, we all knew that.
Well, maybe not the viewers, but no, she's a really good kayaker that's boated all over the world with me and done some runs that I haven't wanted to do. And then she's also a medical doctor. She works in the ER up in Oak Ridge, about an hour from here, and saves lives. And that's excellent because I'm accident prone. So she sews me up when I trip or fall or run into things. And it's mutually beneficial from that standpoint.
So digging into some of the paddling stuff, what was the first big trip that you took that you were like, okay, paddling is actually an adventure tool?
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think. So I really kind of lucked out. So kind of backing up before it was even like the big trip. So in California, there used to be this forum called booth.com. This was before Facebook existed. So like you didn't have the Facebook groups. Like it was literally before Facebook existed. So booth.com was the California one. Kind of like, I'm drawing a blank now. There's a one in Colorado that's still actually used. Drawing a blank on it. Anyways, booth.com forum. I was trying to get into harder boating. The one friend I had that I'd met was just kind of a class 2-3 boater, and I wanted to progress through that. And I posted it. I just randomly met this dude on it that was willing to take me down Giant Gap for my first time. And he was really motivated to get on new runs. So it was kind of like while boating with him, having, not being scared about getting to it put in, not knowing anything about the rapids other than what was in the limited beta sources at the time. That just kind of showed me like that it can be an adventure every day, that you don't need to go on a big trip, and that's kind of where the spark of me wanting to do, if I have an option to do a new run any given weekend, like I'd 100% rather do a new run, even if I don't think it's going to be as good as the classic that's also running, which isn't necessarily a mentality that everyone has, and certainly with working professionals or family boaters, people that have families at home, you have to prioritize your days, right? So like, do you want to get skunked? Do you want to have a kind of a lame day versus go off to Fort 9 to Bridgeport in the South Yuba or Cherry Creek on the Tuolumne, like the guaranteed it's going to be good and it has a gauge, so I know that it has water type of day. There's a balance there. Back then, I had a lot more days to boat, so you're able to risk it too, which but that buddy really kind of showed me that every day can be an adventure. And then it was kind of through that I planned to go to I planned to go to Mexico with this random person that I met on one of the forums, but that fell through. And then the next year, one of my buddies was like, "Hey, we're thinking about going to Mexico, and we have room. Do you guys want to go?" And I was like, "Heck yeah!" And then I ended up kind of planning a lot of, I think they were more than content just to go to the Valles and just do the Micos and the Salto section of the Valles, which are classic little waterfall runs. And I was like, but there's also this run, there's this run. So we ended up doing a little bit more. But that was the first international trip that I went on for boating. And then it was like a year later, I was buying tickets to Chile. And then a year later, I was buying tickets to, where did I go next? Japan might have been next. And then Corsica, and then gone to Europe 3 or 4 times, and Georgia. Yeah.
So how did you prioritize, like, as you were starting to develop your professional career, you're actually making like big boy money,
Yeah.
How did you decide, like, I'm going to spend X amount on travel and adventure? Yeah. So it's probably funny because anyone that's watching this that knows me is probably like, why is he on this? He's always been broke. Because the way that I approached finances was basically I didn't change my spending habits from when I didn't have money. Like I always lived on budgets. I've never carried a credit card debt. So I've never spent more than I had. So it was just a matter of, here's what I need for my essentials, like actual essentials, top ramen every night type essentials. Okay. I would like to eat a little bit nicer, so a little bit more, and then baseline what my minimum was. And then really early on, when I did the math and figured out, I was 25 or whatever when I started my first job out of school. My first job was 15, but my first big boy job. And I was like, oh man, 62 for typical retirement age. Like, that was really far away. Yeah. And I didn't like that answer. So I basically immediately made a spreadsheet to be like, what are my saving goals for every single year in order to retire at 45, because I wanted to be really aggressive. That was, I knew Diane, but we were dating, so like I didn't know anything about if we would be together in the long run. So like she wasn't even included in it.
Sorry, Dave.
Well, no, I mean, like, it was a conservative, like she ended up being a doctor. It's like, oh, that messed up my math, like, yeah, like she was a freshman or sophomore at that time.
But like, how did you fit it into your?
Yeah. So like, I had my budget, and then it was like anything after the savings goals, which is the actual driving force for my life, was the saving goals every year. Then it was like, well, everything else is like, as long as I'm making that savings goal, I can do whatever I want. And I've never cared for nice cars or people thinking that I had a different financial system than I did. Most people that I've met have thought I was broke. So just go on vacations, like whatever. That's the fun part for me. I'd rather do that than drive a BMW or a Mercedes or an Audi or a Tesla or whatever, As soon as I said BMW, I was like, everyone thinks BMW drivers are assholes. So maybe
that's
I shouldn't say, so yeah, and it turns out if you camp and if you cook your own meals, you can actually do international trips pretty cheaply. At the time, living an hour from San Francisco airport, we would drive to San Francisco for the cheaper flights rather than out of Sacramento. Similarly here, the first several years we lived here, we were driving to Atlanta rather than flying out of Knoxville. We still have to do that depending on if we're taking boats with us versus renting in country. But the airfare is the most expensive part. And then if you, sorry, Duolingo's beeping in my pocket. Yeah, exactly. We have trips and my Spanish is lacking, so we're trying to increase my Spanish. Anyways, the airfare is the most expensive part to the trips, and if you go with a couple buddies and split your car 4 ways, we did a lot of jogging shuttle. Like Norway, we didn't have shuttle for most of it. Like Harry, a friend of ours from Austria, joined us for about half of it, but he had kids at the time, so he'd boat with us one day and then do a family day and then boat with us one day and then a family day. It's like half the days we were either hitchhiking or jogging our shuttles. When you went to Quebec with us, it was 3 of us in the one car and we took a bike. And I volunteered you to drive or to ride all the harder shuttles that had bigger hills. I was like, he's young. He's got it. I'll do the easy one. No, but I mean, like so many of our trips were like that where, you just have one car. I went to New Zealand. We went for a honeymoon, but Diane couldn't get 3 weeks off and I could at the time. So I went for a week on our honeymoon without my wife. And as I was checking into our flight, she was like, oh, it's your honeymoon. Well, let me see if there's an upgrade. What seat's your wife in? I was like, she's flying next week. And quickly, they were like, never mind. So that close to being upgraded on a long flight. No, but I went there by myself and did the North Island, by myself, I met people, and like was able to boat every day and had shuttles, hitched once in the North Island. And then on the lower island, on the South Island, Diane was there for the 2 weeks. And again, we didn't know anyone. Like we met some people, we hitched some rides, we did some hiking runs, we did some helicopter runs. Like it worked out, and it was cheap enough, like we didn't stay in hotels. We didn't pay for guide services. Like I'm not against guide service. I have used them. We went to Georgia, the country, and had a guide service because I don't speak Georgian. I don't speak Russian, nor did I think I could learn any of that. And there wasn't beta at the time for any of the runs. So it just made sense, to if you only have a 2-week vacation, if you're going somewhere that foreign if you have the finances for it, to just bite the bullet.
What's been your coolest, some of your international travel? Like what's some of the trips that like the mountaintops that stick out to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, Japan has to be up there. Culturally, it's just stupendous, like the amount of history there. And it's like, growing up in California where the oldest things are like 1849, maybe it would go a little bit older for like some of the Spanish missions, like you might get another 100 years
Japan,
out of it.
And it's like, this hotel has been in my family for 1100 years.
Right, exactly.
Like,
yeah. So like the cultural side of Japan was really cool. Food was so good. Ate so much sushi. And then the rivers blew me away. Like just, I didn't expect, like you hear of how developed Japan is, and especially Tokyo and, the major cities. But then you also hear of how they have to use every single inch of their farmable land. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't expecting these rugged gorges that like no one can get on this side of the mountain of, that you're just out there in the middle of nowhere. And there was we did several of those runs and we did several first descents or second descents. Which was just a really cool kind of experience. They have fantastic boaters there, but for whatever reason, like they don't do the big exploration runs, or they didn't at the time. But they have these, fantastic play boaters, best in the world play boating, but they just didn't have the Class 5 creaking. So we had one friend that my buddy Cody had met randomly couple years earlier, like he was just looking for beta on runs. He was an ex-military guy and had kind of seen that Japan had whitewater to offer. And once he was out of the military, went back for a boating trip and went to this rafting company because he saw a kayak out front. Was like, hey, do you guys have any beta for runs nearby? And that's how he met Yoshi. The next year, he and Darren went back with a group. Sean Bullock was also with them. I think maybe Jared Pat was also in that group. Went back and boated. And then the next year, Darren and I went and paddled with Yoshi. And Yoshi was like, yeah, it's great having all these Americans here because there's only one other boater that I would be able to boat this stuff with in country. And 2 isn't a great number
right.
when you're, sailing, off 40-foot cliffs.
So for like the minds, for people that don't know, like what's the mindset that goes into like class 5 mountaineering or like class 5 like mountain kayaking?
Yeah.
So like what do you need? Kind of what's the gear setup? Like what kind of beta do you do?
Yeah.
Like, cause that's not something that you can just like pick up and decide one day, I'm going to go kayak
right.
this gorge, you know, like,
right. Yeah. So, thankfully I didn't have to start doing the real expedition stuff back when all you had was topo maps. Cause I imagine that was a whole different beast where like all you had was gradients with no understanding of what it actually looked like in that area. So we're able to use Google Earth, or Google Maps now with the satellite views. We're able to not only calculate out your gradients, of how steep do you want for that range of flow, but you're able to see approximately, do I think I'm going to be able to portage around this, et cetera. Because when you're out in these tighter gorges, kind of on more expedition style of boating, there's only one way out of there. And especially if you're in a country that you're not familiar with, like you aren't calling 911, there's no cell signals in there, so we would always carry spot trackers. Back then, that's all it was. We didn't have like the full in-reach type, sending text messages. Back then it was like I'm okay, I'm running late, okay. Or I'm not okay.
I need
it was 3
helicopter
buttons.
now.
It was 3 buttons. Yeah. I'm okay, I'm running late, and we need evac. So we'd have multiple, like we all carried those, even in California. You've boated in California, that even like the everyday 4 or 5 runs, there's a mountain between you and the nearest road. Yeah. And there aren't always trails. But yeah, so, we'd carry breakdowns, we'd carry first aid kits. That's where having people like Diane, our buddy David Morier, who's also now an ER doctor, there's a lot of nurses. Jim Addington's a nurse. He would boat with us a lot. Having those medically trained people, like I was trained in Boy Scouts, but like compared to
Pressure.
Actual training, Diane carries suture kits with her, which is great. And, having access to real prescriptions for pain management type stuff. But yeah, you just have to kind of be prepared to sort out whatever comes at you, so like your rope is as much a safety rope as you might be rappelling off your rope, and you need the carabiners and the pulleys and, all the stuff you need to figure out your way down this gorge. And it takes a lot of teamwork, a lot of trust, and it's one of those things, I think a lot of people don't realize just how much teamwork it is. There are people that boat some hard stuff solo, but there's an extra risk there that those people are willing to take, and they're signing up for that. But when you're boating with a team, you're able to take more precautions. You're able to look at more rapids, but a lot of times it's only one person looking at that rapid, and then they're giving you signals, and everyone needs to be on the same page as what the signals mean. So if someone doesn't say, hey, you should look at this, and they think, oh, that means it's good to go, I should route through this. Or something silly like that. Right.
That
would never happen.
That would never happen, right?
Didn't happen to us.
No, of course not.
But we know a story. So that way you make efficient progress and safe progress, and you have to be trusting your buddies that they're not going to give you information about the rapid that's incorrect or that's too nuanced to where you can't execute to the degree of precision that you need.
Or they don't feel comfortable signing you up for something.
Right.
That
right.
You're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's the unspoken rule that if you tell someone on beta to run something, that you are running it no matter how it goes. There's a great story in California, actually. On the South Fork, the middle fork of the Tule, there's a rapid that slides into an undercut. And I'm drawing a blank on who it was. I think it was actually Drew Duvall that did this, who's a Southeastern guy originally anyways. I don't know where he is now. But he gave beta, and like 5 of his friends just ate shit into this undercut, like all of them. And like, it was an honest, like he really thought that there was a line. So even though 100% of his buddies slid and ate shit in the undercut, he was like, I have to go. Like, I told you it was doable. Yep. So then he went, ate shit in the undercut, you know, but like, that's the type of friend you need. You know, you hope they give you accurate enough beta where you aren't all eating shit. But there's also stories of people getting, you know, betaing their friends into bad lines, and then they're like, well, I'm going to portage. And it's like,
come on.
Like that's not on the table, you know, when you're giving beta, you know.
Yeah. So Japan was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
What are some more mountaintops?
So I mean, California, it's hard to beat. You know,
What's your favorite runs in California?
So for me, Upper Cherry holds a very special spot because, as I was saying earlier, you know, like I had that photo up when I was boating class 3, you know, like aspiring.
Cherry bomb.
Yeah, Cherry bomb. You know, the slide off that 30-footer or whatever it is.
It may have shown up in a few magazines.
Yeah, a few magazines. Yeah. You know, now it's a common run and a common goal, but back then in California, you know, these runs had only been run a handful of times. Yeah. You know, like Scott Lindgren got the first scent of most of them, you know, if not Stanley Holbeck. Scott Lindgren actually ran, like him and his crews actually ran most of the runs, whereas the earlier descents had a lot of portaging. But outside of that, like Seven Rivers Expedition was like 97, 98, maybe it was even early 2000s. I don't know the exact year. It wasn't that long ago from that. Like I remember when they were live blogging their way through the Seven Rivers Expedition. That was only like a couple years prior to me running it. So back then it wasn't an everyday class 5 plus sort of experience. And for me, like I had let myself get more out of shape, you know, so I was having to jog every single day to get into shape. And then the first year came by that I had been training for it, and I don't remember what it was, but the opportunity, I think I was maybe having to take summer classes and I wasn't able to line up the days that I would have needed. So I wasn't able to do it. So then I had to train for another year, you know, keep jogging through another year. So like I jogged so many miles with the purpose of like hiking in there to do that run. So that one for me is like peak, you know, of my boating experience in general. And like, I knew it as soon as I did it, even though at the time I'd only done like 250 runs, but I was like, that 3-day experience was like top of life experiences. You know, like I've had other ones that get there, you know, having kids, getting married, you know, like, but as far as just like having a really big goal that made me nervous that I had worked for, that one has to be up there. But I mean, like Dinky Creek Waterfalls was also a really cool experience.
I've always wanted to get that one.
Yeah, the Rubicon is a lesser known because there's a dam on it, so it doesn't run that often. It has to be a really big year. But that one just like stunning scenery and just, it's like 30 miles long, maybe 25 miles long, something like that. But you take 2 days to do it, and it's just endless class 4 and 5. But it has water so little that there's also a brush problem in it. So every year it gets worse from what I've heard as far as eddies. By the time that you realize you need to scout something, there's no way to shore because you have alder trees growing in the eddy lines. What other ones would be up there? I mean, moving out to California, or moving out here to Tennessee and to, you know, North Carolina area, that first winter, Nate Helms and John Tremblay called me up and were like, hey, we're going to go down to the Bear today. You want to do that? And it's kind of like ignorance is bliss. Like I knew the Bear. That was one of the ones that I'd come and like it had been on my list of things I really wanted to do in the 3 years we were going to be here. But it was like still raining really hard and ended up being like 21 inches or 22 inches, which is a healthy flow. But
connoisseurs level.
Yeah, it was a little bit of ignorance is bliss. You know, like I think it was one of those things if I'd grown up here in boating, like it would have been, I wouldn't have put on probably just out of concern. But it ended up being a great day. You know, and the green was great fun to really kind of get to know, you know, like there's so many different moves on it, you know.
R.I.P.
Yeah, rest in peace, exactly. What other runs? Never got Toxaway. I know that you got Toxaway with Diane a time or two. I was on business trips, so like that's like the hard part. Like I think I was in India on a business trip when you guys were doing it. Yeah. Because she did 2 weekends in a row, and that was either the Australia portion or the India portion of that trip. I did both those countries on that trip.
What about Europe? So like we got Japan, we got California, and then I want to dig into the Southeast stuff later on.
Yeah.
But like, what's some of your other favorite destinations?
Yeah, so Norway, you know, that was another one that like growing up in boating, the Teton Gravity Research guys, Nick Warner, what's the other guy's name? Seth? Scott? Anyways, Teton Gravity Research guys, they did Norway a bunch. So like in Nurpu and Valhalla, and a couple of the other videos, they did Norway. And like, to quote Brad Ludden, it's too big to be this clean. And like, I always thought I would never go there because it just looks so dang big. But when, again, I kind of like put my mind to like getting in shape and was going out to the green a lot to run gorilla and just get desensitized to kind of class 5 and, you know, bedrock slides, you know, like I did plenty of it in California, but it'd been a few years. And in California, you're kind of doing that hard stuff for just kind of a limited few months every year, because the rest of it's kind of boulder garden, higher volume stuff. But going out to the green was a great training ground, I thought, for Norway style of boating. Other than some of Norway does have more volume than the Southeast has. But being able to do some of those runs out there was a dream come true. Had a good group of friends, and Diane was with me too. Harry from Austria was also with me. And then Italy, did Italy another season, which was fantastic. I mean, Italy is pretty darn cheap from European standards. You know, you can eat and drink for just a couple bucks a day. You know, even going out for pizza or whatnot was just a couple bucks back then. I'm sure it's more expensive now. This was maybe 15 years ago. But like, you know, nice bottles of wine, like $1, you know. Whereas like you go over to Switzerland, which also has great boating, which we've done a couple times. The first time actually we were going from Italy to Switzerland, we were like, we know it's going to be like 10 to 15 euro per bottle of wine instead of the 1 to 2 euro. So we bought like 20 bottles of wine. We drove over the border. We're like an hour away from where we're going. And our friend Emmy opened the boot of the car and all the wine. I mean, it's only like 20 euro of wine. So like, it wasn't like that big of a deal, but the opportunity cost, to use a business term, of like going from 1 to 2 euro to 10 to 15 euro, it was like 200 euro to replace those 20 bottles. Yeah. It was like, we aren't going to be nearly as drunk as we were hoping for the second half of this trip. But yeah, so Switzerland was great. And then did the Pyrenees. One of the years, that year was a Richter high flow year. So we didn't get to do the classics, which was a bummer. And we haven't been back there yet. But like amazing scenery, you know, both the French and the Spanish side, great people, great food, great scenery, great rivers. And then we also went to Georgia, the country. Yeah, it was just all around great. And also done trips down in South America and then New Zealand as well. It's just like New Zealand's also a top tier destination. You know, I think everyone knows that, you know, the scenery is amazing. Kind of a different style of whitewater for the most part. You know, it's mainly like the boulder gardens. You know, they get their geology and their snow melt means that they have different rivers every single year. And they also have a lot of sieves, which, you know, it's different than kind of like the glory boating. Like California has a lot of like the big bedrock stuff that's kind of like glory, but there's not as many dangerous things, I feel like. Same thing with Norway, you know, like, yeah, it's really big, but as Brad Ludden's quote, you know, it's also really clean, you know, like, yeah, New Zealand, it's like, it's not necessarily like the big photogenic stuff, but it's really dangerous. Yeah. You know, but like the watercolor is beautiful, mountains are beautiful. You know, they have the huts, you know, so you do overnight runs and you pull over in a hut and you have somewhere warm to sleep, you know, like, and getting meat pies every morning, like, they're delicious. If you ever go to New Zealand or Australia, little breakfast meat pies, best thing ever.
Solid.
Yeah, it's the best thing ever. I don't know why they don't exist here, because I feel like Americans would love that stuff better than a breakfast sandwich by far.
Yeah, what about Canada? I'm a little biased.
Oh, Canada's great. Yeah,
you were there for one of them. I went with you on the Canada trip. So
yeah. No, I mean, so we've done Canada. So we did like the Whistler kind of BC, Western BC side of it. 1 year out of Sacramento, we drove up and did some of those classes. Checkmist.
Did you get Rogers?
Sioux. Yeah, we did Rogers on that trip. It was low flow, but it was beautiful. You know, like it's one of those ones that, yeah, it could have been better with higher flow, but like I think the experience of being there is the purpose of the Rogers, you know, like
that's still very high on my list.
Yeah, just a beautiful triple cascade, and there's other fun rapids in it, but like the triple cascade is the main thing about it, you know. And it's being low just meant it was lower stress, which was great because we were too lazy to scout the bottom two, so I was going off it blind, and the good thing there weren't big hydraulics there. No, but speaking of safety with more people, and then we're running stupid stuff without looking. But yeah. Yeah, and then we did the Quebec trip that you and Smoke and Steve were on, which was great. You know, and there's still more stuff up there that I wanted. You know, the Turow, that was way too high on that trip. But that Valen was fun. You know, it would have been nice to have gotten to do the Nielsen.
Yeah.
But my neck. So.
That's so weird.
Yeah, my neck was hurt because someone gave me some beta that was questionable.
However, I did send the beta. unlike some people. Like
you sent a good line. I did not execute on the beta well. No, but
my bad. That was my fault.
No, I took a header onto a rock, so then I was really, really sore the next 2 days, so we weren't able to do the class 5 stuff. No, but that was a cool trip. You know, there's a bunch more stuff. The original plan on that trip was to go to an area that didn't have a bunch of beta, but then my Vermont buddy ended up not being able to join us, and he was the one that had the information and had the connections, so we had to kind of replan for that Quebec trip. So there's whole other regions that, you know, haven't even thought about going to. And then Diane and I went there. So the summer that I retired was also the summer that she finished her residency. We had 6 weeks and went on like all the way west up into Canada and then over Canada and down and back, sort of road trip, and spent a lot more time this time kind of on the eastern side of BC and Alberta. So like boating through Revelstoke, as well as Banff and Jasper and some of those things. It was late season. So like, again, left a lot out there. That's classic class 5 stuff that just didn't have enough water when we were there, because we were there pretty late in the year for their snow melt. But fantastic, you know, like, you know, there's always people hiking all over the place for Banff and Jasper scenery, and then you go to this obscure little crack in the earth and are boating through it, you know, with the big old glacial peaks all around you. And it's just like pretty cool experience.
Subpar scenery, yeah.
I mean, and some of the days were like class 3, and it was like, but you have class 5 scenery, you know, like it's hard to go wrong. Yeah.
What about some of the stuff in the southeast? What's like your pinnacles?
Yeah, so Bear is definitely there. Overflow was a cool one. I enjoyed Overflow. Thompson was a cool one. That one's just like such a little amount of water. Like in California, that type of stuff isn't runnable. Like it doesn't channelize because the stuff that has little water doesn't get enough water to push the boulders out of the way. Whereas in the southeast with the rain flows, like a lot of times you're running it at kind of the bottom of its running window, you know, like a lot of the rivers just get way flooded every year. So yeah, Thompson was just kind of cool to be like sliding down this granite going Mach 10. What else would there be? Henderson was a cool experience, dropping off Walden's Ridge. You know, these things that were kind of peak of my experiences.
Not too far from here.
Yeah, not too far from here at all. What else would there have been? I mean, you know, the Southeast, one of the things that we love about the Southeast is the easier stuff is just really, really good. Mm-hmm. You know, like the class 4 days that you have, you know, like doing Island to Nemo and then going up to Little Clear, doing Little Clear, into the Obed, into the Emery, back to Nemo, and then going over and doing Crooked Fork, you know, like
all on the same day.
All on the same day.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're boating on anywhere from 100 CFS on the Island to maybe 75 CFS on Little Clear.
To 75,000.
75,000 on the Obed and Emery. You know, it's just like, it's a really cool experience. And those types of experiences you don't necessarily get out west. So that's cool. Also the geology out here, especially on the plateau side of things with the bluffs, with the limestone and sandstone, that's the geology that they don't have in California. So that's, I always enjoy being on the plateau. You know, the smoky side of stuff and the mountain side of stuff isn't necessarily my favorite type of whitewater. So like I have less of my like fantastic Southeast days, like the West Prong. I mean, some of the people that are going to be listening to this are going to be like, you're an idiot. But like, it's just not my favorite type of boat. Like, you know, I grew up with kind of the pool drop and kind of like the bigger,
slides,
kind of
cascades,
scarier thing, but not necessarily like just the continuous, endless need to be precise and technical. I remember that like my first week out here, Reber and John invited me out to go to West Prong, and like they knew that I was friends with Jim. So I was like,
you're automatically in.
Jim was like in India boating, so he didn't even actually vouch for me. They just knew that I knew him. And like I didn't know anything about the West Prong. They were like, oh, it's really good. It's really steep. And like, I remember being halfway down and being like, I'm gonna have to get a little bit more accurate, because like in California, like, you know, you need big, powerful moves. Like the holes are big, the curlers are big, you know, you have big boils that you're fighting through. And it's like all while you're doing class 4 or 5 or 5. Like, but yeah, if you're off by a foot, as long as you're taking the right stroke, it's usually all right, you know? But out here, it's like, you know, inches matter when you're only on 200 CFS. It's like creaking, but in a river situation. And it's just, things get compounded. So, you know, an error, it might be okay now, but 100 feet from now, you know, that error is going to be magnified as your error gets slightly bigger with each little chute or little, you know, rock that you're bumping against. And that was just a totally different experience for me when I moved here. So that, like, I enjoy boating in the mountains, you know, I enjoy those runs, but still to this day, like, you know, like, especially now that I'm not boating as much, you know, and like you are a little bit rusty, you go out to Tremont, you know, and there's healthy water in it, and you're like, oh man, like, let's see if I have the strength, you know, and then you start worrying about, you know, your fitness levels too, because it's nonstop. And, you know, worst case scenario, if you're swimming, you know, do you have the fitness after being exhausted, getting work to, you know, swim, you know? So it's all around. I enjoy it, but I like the plateau more.
What are some of the characteristics, like kind of going back to your professional career? Like, man, like you've been cited in academic works, you've been cited in a lot of like peer review stuff. Like, what are some of the characteristics that translated to your professional career and your paddling like career?
You know, so I mean, I think having goals, you know, like actually writing down goals, you know.
Why writing it down though? Like,
to keep yourself accountable, you know, like if you make a goal and you say, well, you know, I want to have this much money by this age, or I want to do this run, but then you don't sit there and look at it, you know, you're going to have off days. You're going to have weeks that you might be tired, or you might get injured. And, you know, like the training to do that Upper Cherry hike, 11 miles with, you know, 100 some odd pounds on your back, you know, for several months leading up to it. You know, I have 2 bad knees. I've had knee surgery on both my knees before I finished college. So like I had to train to feel like I was going to be able to be successful on that trip and make good decisions on the trip, rather than, well, I'm going to run this because I'm too tired to portage, and to be making safe decisions as far as, you know, I'm running this and I have the fitness to work this out. Without having things written down, I don't see how it's not my set to hold myself accountable without something being on paper, you know, and I still do that with, you know, even just our planning vacation goals, you know, like, going on vacations with kids isn't necessarily easy. You know, it's exhausting. Like, I mean, we aren't even kayaking these days on those vacations, but just hiking every day, camping with, you know, now my kids are 3 and 6, almost 4. You know, it's tiring. So like having this list of like, here's the vacations I want to do while they're little, and like do little kid things. And, you know, here's the vacations I want to do when they're older, and these vacations that they do when they're older, what do I need to do to get them ready for those vacations? You know, like the hiking, you know, how much do we need to hike for them to be confident on a 4-mile hike this summer at 3.5 years old? You know, you can't go off the couch, you know, like that's not realistic, you know? So we were hiking twice a week, and they started off as like 0.7-mile hikes, you know, like those are basically just walks, but we'd be going in the wilderness. There's a lot of wilderness near Knoxville, you know, the urban wilderness, as well as getting out onto the plateau and surrounding areas, and just going for little walks. And, you know, you kind of desensitize them to, you know, the pain, you know, of the muscles kind of burning. And, you know, sometimes we do get bored on walks, you know, and figuring out the fun games to play or what snacks are more effective. Kind of all of it, though, you know, you need the plans from how to get to point A to point B to do the experiences you want to experience. And kayaking was the same, you know, I have these big goals, you know, every year I'd make a list of 25 runs of, I'm hoping to boat these runs. And some of them would be kind of stretch runs, you know, like the kind of stepping up where I'm comfortable on. Some would be runs that would help me get more comfortable. So those stepping up runs were good decisions. And then some were also just easy runs. Like, I just don't want to forget about these runs. You know, they only run a couple days a year. And I want to remember to think through if it's going to have water this weekend, you know, in any given weekend. And same thing with the professional world, you know, like so when I finished my undergraduate at UC Davis, undergrad required 180 quarter units. for any other major other than aeronautical engineering, they kick you out of school when you hit 220. But aeronautical engineering actually required like 189 units or something like that. So even more than normal graduation numbers. So that's why they made the exception for it, for they don't kick you out at the 215 or 220, whatever it was. So I ended up graduating with like 229 with the 2 majors, 2 minors through undergrad. But it was still just like, what do I want to do? And this is what it's going to take to do that. And then with the career, you know, a lot of it, as I was saying when I made that spreadsheet about how do I stop working as soon as possible, you know, how much money do I need to make? That was kind of what took me from my idealistic, I want to be technical and not being important, to, well, I think I actually
kind of have to.
Kind of want to, you know, make a little bit more money just so I don't have to work as long, because I don't want to work until I'm 65. I've seen too many friends that by the time they're 65, their bodies are broken down, their kids are grown, they're not able to do the fun stuff. And I wanted to do it all. You know, I wanted to do all the fun stuff. I wanted to be able to be a parent and have the experiences with my kids and raise them in nature, traveling, experiencing different cultures, different people, you know, just all of it. I want them to see the world. So that, you know, I looked at my career path and was like, okay, this is the career path that I need in order to live that life of experiences.
I really want, like, I don't know where this is going to go, but like, I really feel like people, especially young people, when they get, like, they don't understand how they just see the social media wave tops.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to kayaking or like any sort of adventure activity, they see like, you know, you at the pinnacle of this drop, getting ready, like scouting, getting ready to send, and they see that picture, but they don't realize the months and years that went into putting somebody there.
Yeah.
And so like, what advice would you give to somebody who's wanting to get into like a highly demanding field or like a highly demanding activity that requires a lot of dedication and persistence?
Yeah, I mean, nothing is easy. You know, I was actually just having this conversation with my 6-year-old because she plays AYSO soccer and she asked her coach to put her on defense, not because she likes playing defense, but because she didn't want to run as much and she thought that would be less running. And I asked her why she was playing defense all game, and she told me this. And it really made us have a sit down talk about, you know, nothing in life that's worth doing is easy, right? So when it comes to getting good at kayaking and to where you can do these runs safely, it takes time, it takes work, and it takes effort. I think one big thing that we see with the social media days, as you're saying, when you see these photos, you know, I find it crazy that you get these people that have been boating like a season or 2 seasons and they're out in California High Sierra stuff, you know, like, or even just like the new boaters that are like, my goal is to do the Middle Kings. Like, to me, that's crazy because like that it had only been done like 3 times when I was at that point, you know, so like that wasn't a goal that you had. You didn't have goals to become professional boaters. So where was I going with that train of thought? You know, so the social media stuff, it drives people to I think, jumping to their final goal and then not taking the time to think of the interim goals, where I think, you know, you can have your end goal, like you want that end goal and you want to make the plan to go to it.
Yeah, everybody does.
Right. But I think people view that end goal and don't put the quality time into what are your subset goals to actually progress that way and reevaluate, you know, because just because you wanted to boat class 5+ when you started boating, you know, once you actually start getting out there and have a scary experience on class 4 or 5, you might reevaluate that. Mm-hmm. And that's something else that so many people, they haven't had that bad experience in the less critical situation. You know, like, oh, they've swum once in their entire career and they're going off to do something really stout. It's like you want to have boated enough that statistically you're probably going to have been offline or swum or just have to do a big time, not even plan B, but plan C or D, you know, or be involved with an injury extraction, because that all plays into your math, you know, like how hosed am I if I get injured here? You know, like that's something you think about when you're traveling with kayaking, is one, ruining your vacation and your time off work and the money that you have invested in your flight. And the rest of the trip, you know, your one chance maybe to paddle in that country in your entire life for this drop. versus portaging it, like, because I've walked around drops that I know I could have run, but there was that percent that, well, if I melt off and peat on that rock, that's the end of my vacation. Like, it's not worth it to me, So making those interim goals and getting enough experience so that you're able to reevaluate your goals and reset your goals. You might still keep this goal, but maybe it needs to be a longer term. Maybe it's not going to be in 2 years from now that you're on the Middle Kings. Maybe it's 5 years from now, because you need to actually build up the proper amount of experience and develop the team that you're going to be boating with. That's another thing. It seems like a lot of people kind of bypass, not everyone, but it seems like a lot of people don't put the emphasis on the team that they boat with. It's viewed as cliques sometimes, which, I'm not a fan of cliques, and I do enjoy bringing people down new stuff. But there is an aspect to it that, it is teamwork and you need to be a team. And it's not always easy to drop someone new into that team, especially if you're really kind of pulling them up to that level that you guys are going on the trip on. There a lot of times those people are scared and therefore they're not going to be necessarily contributing to the scouting. There'll be, a little bit more hand holding. And there's time and place, but some runs, especially out west or in some of the more remote countries, you're doing a lot of miles and you don't have the option to scout every big rapid. Cherry Creek is kind of a classic of this. The Tuolumne Cherry Creek, the classic 4 or 5 river section. The dam turns on at like 7 in the morning and turns off at like 11, and no kayakers getting to put in at 7 in the morning. It's like we're usually getting put in at like 10. So like you're kind of allotted one scout, one screwed up line, hopefully not a swim, because anything more than that and you're running out of water, right? So, there would always be randoms that, no one knew from out of state or just boaters that are coming up that didn't have a group and be like, hey, you mind showing me down? And no one, if you don't know the people, you don't take them down that run because just too much can go wrong on that run.
So what advice would you give to people like young paddlers who like aren't necessarily plugged into the community? Like what are some things that they need to do to be at that level to where people are like, okay, we'll take you down. We'll show you.
I mean, that comes with the time too, right? Like it's boating the easy runs with people, like don't just call your local, A+ boater when it's time to go run Toxaway. Call them up when you're like, hey, I don't know if you're doing anything. I'm going to go do sinks on the little, just a regular old class 4 run. Try to go boat with the people, develop the relationships with the people on the easier stuff. Don't have the relationship be one way. Because if you're only calling someone just for that hard run, no one wants to be used. Yes. You'll find people that are going to be hand holding you through your boating progression, but they're going to only do it if they're your friend. Like I got very lucky that I had kind of 3 different friends, Brian Austin early on, Darren McCoy, through my peak of California stuff, and then Jim Janney kind of overlapped that as well, taking me on a lot of my harder stuff where, it was years of friendship with these people for them to be willing to, hand hold me down the harder runs. But I was also boating with them all the time. Mm-hmm. We were going off
on
to do
everything.
Yeah, like Darren and I'd probably say over half our days were on class 3 on the South American, just play boating, just doing stupid stuff. It was our closest run. I would call him to see if he wanted to go boating. A lot of times he would say yes, like that's what you need. So don't just call the good boater for the good day of boating, call them, develop the relationships on all the days of boating, even the stuff that you don't think they might want to go on, you might be surprised. That'd be my biggest takeaway. I think that's the way kind of around people feeling used, people feeling like the relationship's one-sided, and actually building the friendships you need. And as I said, it takes time. Like if you've only been boating for the 1 season or the 2 seasons, people aren't going to know who you are. To even the word of mouth thing, for showing up somewhere and be like, hey, does anyone mind showing me down? But if you've been around and people are like, oh, you boated with my buddy so-and-so, like they said you were cool and, that you were capable enough on this run. So I'll show you down.
One of my favorite things about like, it's a blessing and a curse, but when you're out on these trips, everything's a test.
Yep.
So you're getting graded on how efficient you are getting your gear together.
Oh, yeah.
You're getting efficient. You're grading on like how you help pitching in, loading, unloading
Yep.
boats.
Yep.
You know, whether you're the dude that's just looking to take
Yep.
or if you're willing to give.
Yeah,
Like,
and if you're always running late, that that's a markdown, for and if you're the last person to be dressed by 10 minutes, when everyone else is sitting there ready. If come scout time, if you are the one that needs to watch everyone in the group run the rapid, that's not a great way on the longer, harder runs. Like you might get to see one person run it. A lot of times when we're scouting, we all take a look at it and we all go back to the boats and no one actually gets to see anyone run it until you're at the bottom watching the last people come through. It's all part of what's needed, and certainly when you're newer and coming up, you'll be able to watch one person run a rapid sort of thing, but then you need to make up your mind. Like I've always kind of thought if I'm borderline and if I need to see someone run the rapid to decide if I'm going to portage, I'm just going to start portaging because portaging takes longer than running the rapid almost always. So if I'm borderline, if I'm like, that looks ugly, well, I'm just going to portage just so I'm not holding up the group. It's meant that I've missed out on some rapids that, they actually really sold that line. I didn't think that looked that good, but they plugged through and they came up 10 feet downstream and all for the better for it.
But you kept your net positive rating with the group.
Yeah, because I'm at the bottom waiting for them.
Yes.
With a rope.
Yes.
So
providing assistance.
Right. Like having a service, and also I'd bring a camera so everyone's always happy to have photos of themselves, So like that's actually one of the big cheats as you're coming up and boating. If you bring the camera, people will cut you a lot of slack as far as hanging out longer.
That's the only reason why people took me down. They're like, oh, he's a media guy?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I mean, I think that like Darren too is like, he was a photographer. So like he was always behind the camera. Yep. And I think he was stoked that he was actually getting photo and video of him. But yeah.
Who are some people that like were instrumental in your boating career? I know you mentioned Darren. So
Darren certainly. I would also be remiss to not mention my brother. My brother is 3 years older than me. So he was in scouts above me. So like he learned how to do a roll in a pool. Like we didn't have movies or anything. So like he just sorted it out with, flailing. And then seeing him do it, then I was sorting it out via flailing. And he raft guided before I did. So like he was up on the Trinity boating Pigeon Point, boating Burnt Ranch Gorge, and took me down those for my first time, that sort of thing. So certainly a lot of credit to my brother. And then Brian Austin, that random guy I met on Booth, that, that first like season and a half of just kind of exploring stuff before it was actually on a trip. The first trip I went on with Diane was also with him. Like Diane came with us to go up to the Smith River and stuff. And then Diane, certainly, the next 15 years, she was basically on every trip until we had kids,
Plus,
and then, and
ongoing.
Now it's been 20 years, but for literally like the first 15 years, the amount of days that we weren't together on the water were like very, very minimal. Now it's more often where like we might both be at the water, but like she'll do a lap and then I'll do a lap type of thing. Or one of us gets the boat for the day and then the other one will boat the next time. So she's certainly been a big part of it. And then Jim, he's been here longer. So, he's showed me down a lot of harder runs, doing stuff like Henderson after work the first time. It's like, I don't know that I would have put on at, 5 o'clock when it's getting dark at 7 or whatever. I can tell you with certainty I would not have put on, if someone didn't know the lines very well.
I'd say Jim and Kirk are probably like two of the most underrated people in the southeastern
and
boating.
Caleb.
Yeah,
Paquette
and
too.
Caleb.
Like, yeah.
It's like endless energy, endless knowledge, and like endless ability to just help people.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, no doubt. And I met Kirk actually out in California originally as well. So yeah, Kirk and Jim. So when we moved here, like a couple weeks after we moved here, Kirk had us over for dinner and stuff. Met his wife and kid, who's now Class 5 plus boat. Like, he was like, "Oh, you're the wet state guy." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, I'm kind of like a celebrity to this little kid." He's boating Middle Kings and stuff. I was like, "Hey, man, he's better than I ever was." No, but they're all such a quality family. I wish I could boat with them more, but with their work on the water, it just doesn't work out as much to boat with Kirk.
What are some of have you ever had, like, what are some of the low points? Like, if you ever have any injuries or like, what's some of the stuff that held you out of kayaking?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been injury prone my entire life. So there's right before Chile, I tore my hamstring playing Aussie rules football, and like, so like I was in a lot of pain on that Chile trip. So like doing what was at the time the 70-footer on the middle Palgine, like it hadn't like it had done one clap. So it wasn't the 30, 50, 40. It was now like the 30 to 70. That was just a non-option because like I just couldn't torque on that leg enough to be sure that I wasn't going to muck something up. So that was kind of one of the early injuries. Right after we went to Austria, Slovenia, Italy for boating, and I came back. And then the one time I had a bad line on Gorilla, I went off backwards and I took the nub right to my ribs and broke some ribs. So that one was a bummer. It kept me out for a bit. But then, the biggest thing was the heart surgery.
Yeah.
Not to drop that nonchalantly. We had kids, and then we were still maintaining pretty good boating. The pandemic happened at the back end of the main pandemic. We were getting out boating again, did Colorado, did a really nice trip to Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont for boating. And we had Tobin, and then the next year I was diagnosed with aneurysm on my aortic root, which is like the main artery
kind
into
of
the
important.
heart. Yeah. And I was told I couldn't do anything. Like they were like, no, you can't kayak, you can't mountain bike, you can't hike. They're like, you can go on walks like around your neighborhood, but keep your heart rate under 110. It's like my heart rate goes to like 180, like regularly.
A lot, yeah.
It's like I went kayaking with a heart rate monitor on one day on just like the Koi and in the Olympic section, just like having fun and stuff. Like I was hitting like 155 and it was just like craps. And then took about a year off leading up to the surgery, and then 3 months after the surgery before I was cleared to do anything again. And then started up a bit again after that, like celebrated when I was cleared. We went and did one of those island little clear days, which was a really cool way to come back after a year of not boating, year and a half of not boating. But, during that year and a half, I've lost so much core strength that now I have a herniated disc in my back from mountain biking last year. So like that injury is kind of cascaded to prevent a lot more. So like my hiking days with the kayak on my shoulder, those realistically are probably behind me.
What did you do during your recovery from the surgery to keep positive and to like?
So, I mean, it was hard,
because I remember talking to you a little bit and
yeah.
you were good, but you sounded kind of, understandably
so
you were
early
down.
on during the diagnosis, I'm glad that my diagnosis to surgery to recovery was short. Some people have the diagnosis and then they live with it for several years, because surgery, even just 10 years ago, like the life expectancy for a 40-year-old, which is how old I was when I had the surgery, was only 16 years post-surgery, which I wasn't willing to accept that, the idea of not seeing my kids graduate high school, let alone live the rest of their life, or be able to participate in any of that activity that I was talking about, the life I wanted to experience with my kids and the world I wanted to show them. Like that was all vanishing. That was like the bigger part. Suddenly this thing, like I had missed a weekend of kayaking, like in 25 years, I think, something like that. Like I'd gone every weekend that I was home, like for 25 years, like blown off weddings, blown off family reunions,
sorry, can't go. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it had been the number one priority, and then to suddenly not be able to do it at all. Somehow that was less bad than the actual part of life and missing life. The kids, the wife, the other bigger goals that I had in what I wanted to do with life. So, as I came out of it, once they said, okay, we're going to do surgery, the new date on the surgery is much better. I should have a normal life expectancy, ish. Once I came out of it, it's kind of reprioritized some of my stuff a little bit, like where, like 2 weeks ago or whatever, there was a day that things were running, and like I had the green light to go boat. Diane was like, you should go boat today. But the thing that we had been keeping an eye on for Aster's first day in her own boat of doing class 1, the lower little, which we wanted like just the right flow, like low, but not too low, but also not at all high. Because while she's paddled flat water in her own boat, she hasn't boated any sort of actual current and rapids and stuff. But it was running. And it was like, to me, it was an easy decision. Like, that is a means to my bigger goals of what I want to do with life and with my kids and, what I'm hoping my kids experience in life. So Diane was actually asleep because she worked till like 1 a.m. that morning. So like at 9, I woke her up and I was like, all right, everything's loaded. We're going to Little. She's like, oh, you're not going to go? It's like, no, we're just going to go to Little and do the family day. So it coming out of the surgery, it definitely made it more clear to me what the important things on life are.
Refocused.
Yeah, refocused. Where, I still have goals, like for the kayaking. It's just that those goals are further down the line. Now my interim goals are getting to where my kids can go do these class 3 trips, because there's a lot of class 3 runs in the world. And you can go to a lot of cool places and do class 3 and then class 4 without having to do class 5. And now my goals are those, like those class 3, class 4 family trips once the kids are teenagers. If they take to kayaking, who knows? Maybe they won't. But if they don't, then, they also seem to enjoy hiking right now and they enjoy mountain biking. So there's a lot of other cool experiences that, when I get to these goals, I'll reevaluate and reset new goals if I need.
Gotcha. What about your professional career? Like what were some of the lows that you had to push through?
So, certainly once, so I moved into program management when I was at Aerojet working on rockets, right? So I went from ballistician to project engineer to program manager. And I was like the youngest program manager at the time at the company. It was kind of usually a thing that once you were like chief engineer, you kind of move into program management. But I had worked on that Bigelow project, which was putting me in front of VPs regularly. So they all knew me. So it kind of opened up a door to move into program management earlier in my career than was typical back then. And the very first weekend, Paul Gamache and I were putting on the Salmon Fork, Paul Gamache and I were putting on the Salmon Fest, which was a race on the Salmon River way up in the Marble Mountains of Northern California. And it was a fundraiser for our friend who he'd grown up with boating and scouts who had died in Afghanistan in war. He was a soldier. And that very first weekend, my boss calls me up on like Friday night and was like, something's gone wrong on this project. I'm going to need you to come in this weekend, both days, all weekend, be here at 7 a.m. I was like, I can't do that. I'm putting on a festival 6 hours from home. Like, I'm going to be gone Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Like, there's no way around that. And he was like, well, I understand. Don't ever tell me that again, but you can be gone this weekend. And I plan to come in the next 6. That was a low point. We're being like, what did I just sign up for? Thankfully, I didn't have to come in all 6 of those.
Yeah.
But that was definitely a low point. When I moved into consulting, when I left Aerojet and went to consulting, which was business consulting, a lot of program management, installing program management offices at companies or streamlining business practices between like merging business units or companies. Mm-hmm. The company, when I started there, it was only like 10 of us. It was a small consulting boutique company. And over the years that I was there, it grew into be like a 100-person company. And it changed a lot, as companies do as they grow. And the kind of the cool, small, intimate nature of the executive management at the company morphed, as she got taken advantage of by a person or two, working remotely and not actually working or billing stuff that wasn't accurate. A lot of the leeway that had been given earlier and the flexibility had been taken away. And it was after kind of one of those things where one of my team members, we were working for the utility company named Aclara. They make devices for utilities. And we were traveling. I was traveling every week to St. Louis. One of my colleagues was traveling every week to Cleveland from San Francisco. and his dad was dying, and he wanted to, like, it had been a long process, but his dad was terminally ill and was like, it was now end of life type care. He wanted to go from Cleveland, drive to Buffalo, which is where he was from, where his dad lived. And I gave him the approval. I was in charge of that contract. I was in charge of him from the internal workings of the company. Got the okay from the client for him to do that instead of flying back to San Francisco, because what they care, he wasn't going to be missing any contract days or any billable hours or anything. And the CEO nixed it and was like, no, and shut it down. And that was a low point just from the culture of the company. Wasn't, sorry, that's an alarm to pick up my child from school, but my wife's taking care of that today. There's going to be some other alarms. I should have quieted all those. Sorry.
Okay.
I have to have alarms for everything. Otherwise I forget these days. You get carried away. But yeah, that was a low point just because it was, as I've kind of talked about today, like everything is kind of an agreement, and I didn't want to give more of my life to a company than what the contract that I have with that company is. My 40 hours a week, plus or minus some. Certainly there's going to be weeks that you need to help your team, and if you have ownership in any project, you're going to work extra sometimes. That's expected. But when the expectation starts to be that work always takes precedent over every other aspect of your life, and to me, my buddy's dad being end of life and having work have a silly rule that they weren't willing to cut an exception for, that was a low point for me. And it was actually like, I had recently been promoted to vice president in that company. I was in charge of all operations. We had 100 people. The company was doing really well. I went to that Pyrenees trip, and it was while we were kayaking the Pyrenees that I was like, when I get back, I'm going to put in my 2 weeks notice and just be done. And that's, the guys I was with, Reiner and Harry, and I think Diane believed me. But came back on Monday, put in my 2 weeks notice, and then I did a year and a half of consulting individually, and then we had kids, and then I retired fully once we had the kids.
How has paddling made you a better person?
So as many young people, teenage years are hard, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we're all changing. We don't know our place in the world. College is tough.
I mean, do you still know?
I mean, I feel like I have a better idea, but like, there was a lot of teenage angst. I was not necessarily always a positive person. I was depressed. I was anxious, all that stuff. Kayaking, I credit with giving me purpose in those early years. And then not only that, but it made it so suddenly I went from being an okay student, like I was getting B's, some A's, but mostly B's in college. Because I was always procrastinating. Like, I was always like, well, I'll do the homework the night before it's due, or I'll, study for the test the night before the test. But kayaking and being like, well, my weekends are now covered. Like, I'm going kayaking on the weekend made it so I had to be way more proactive with my studies, with my time management, with everything. So suddenly my grades suddenly became A's, because if I got stuck on something, I had a week before it was actually due, so I could go to the office hours and talk to the professor about the problem that I was having, understanding the concept, right? So it made all of that better. And then as far as, once I met Diane in the relationship, she's made me immensely better, as you would expect. She's now my wife, So, having someone to share all these experiences with and be able to share our extracurricular goals, we had pretty much the same goals. She had a little bit loftier goals than I did. She wanted to do a couple harder runs than I had a desire to do. But we were able to progress along those goals, which has made me a better person and a better partner. Like, if I was always having to leave my partner to go boat, there would have to be some other sort of balance there. And we just haven't had to make that sort of sacrifice or that sort of compromise because we were both going boating, which has aligned well in my life. So, I mean, kayaking really has changed my entire path, because I don't think I would have had the success professionally, wouldn't have had the success relationship, and it's given me an immense amount of pleasure through the last 25, 30 years.
It's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
It's kind of.
Yeah.
What do you want to leave people with? So plug a wet state, plug like.
So wetstate.com. If you're traveling, to the southeast, if you're traveling to Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, if you're traveling to California, or any of the big boating locations in Europe, or kind of just want to daydream and look at some rivers that maybe you haven't seen, you should check it out. There's 650 almost write-ups, and I don't remember how many videos there are, 170, 180 videos of different rivers. Yeah, check it out and get inspired and go see some of the places.
Well, I appreciate you making the trek. So thanks for coming over.
Yeah, thanks for talking.
Hey, no problem. This is fun.
Yeah.
So we'll do it again soon, I'm sure.
Sweet.
So appreciate you coming.
Yeah, anytime.